Okay, are we ready? Thank you. I really apologize for the delay. Thank you so much for being here tonight for our City Council meeting, Tuesday, November 14th. I welcome all of you, and we will start with a Pledge of Allegiance by Desiree Barth.
Please say the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Desiree. We are grateful tonight to have the Bountiful Utah Orchard Steak primary president with us to pray to open our meeting. We thank you, Lisa A. Adair. So we'll turn the time over to you for our prayer. Thank you.
Our Father in heaven, we come before thee this day full of gratitude. We are blessed to live in an amazing land of freedom. We are grateful for our Constitution and for the leaders of this great nation. We are also blessed to live in a choice place here in Utah, and specifically here in the city of Bountiful. We are grateful for the fine communities, the businesses, the places of worship, the good work that goes on to help those who may be underserved in our communities. We pray that that will continue to bless them. We are grateful for Mayor Harris, grateful for our council members, Father, who are before us this day. We always pray, dear Father, for the needs of all to be considered, and that we can feel impressed, Father, when it is time to set aside personal agendas and listen with our hearts and with open ears, and be able to embrace those things that would continue to bring us the safe and caring communities and neighborhoods that we are blessed to have here in this wonderful city that we are blessed to live in. We ask these favors and blessings, dear Father, and we do this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We will now have our public comment period. If anyone would like to say anything, you have 2 minutes. If you would just come to the mic and state your name and address, and we'll turn the time over now for public comment period.
Gary Davis, 2814 South, 500 West. My wife called it monkism. I'm sorry, but I got to do it.
Thank you, Gary. Any other public comment period? Any other public comment tonight? Okay, we will now consider approval of minutes of previous meetings held January 12th, 13th, and February 28th.
Mayor, I had a couple changes that I had previously alerted the council and the staff to. Would you like me to repeat those?
Sure, if you would. Thank you.
Okay. On page 30 of the packet for the minutes of February 28th, on line 5, it's a section where I'm giving a legislative update and describing a bill, and the word that is in there is that the bill is in support of the Intermountain Power Agency. The bill was definitely not in support, so I suggest that the more appropriate way to describe it would be to change the word support to concerning. And then the next one is on page, same day, February 28th, page 34 of the packet. It's on lines 41 and then wraps over to lines 42. The line says, for the users of the North Canyon Trailhead. The trailhead I was referencing is the Hidden Lakes Trailhead, not the North Canyon Trailhead. I don't know if anyone else has any corrections, but those are the two that I would note and would motion if there aren't any other changes.
Second.
Okay, those, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes with those changes. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We will now move to council reports, and we'll start with Councilwoman Segura Bar.
I have nothing to report this evening. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilwoman Price Hewish.
Sorry, I just wanted to get on everybody's radar. The Bountiful Davis Art Center, they have wonderful programming. The exciting thing that's happening next is the high school art competition, and that will be, I think, opening this week at the Bountiful Davis Art Center, and I congratulate them on an amazing auction and fine art auction that they held last weekend. They raised a lot of money to help promote their programming, concert series, art classes, the many wonderful things that they do for Bountiful City. And I was lucky enough to be in attendance and hear music and view amazing art, and the work that's being done there cannot be overstated for bringing great culture to Bountiful City. So go this week, beginning this week, for the next 2 or 3 months and see the high school fine arts contest winners.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Do you have a report tonight, Councilman Bell?
I do. A couple items. As I mentioned last time, our food pantry, the Bountiful Food Pantry, I shouldn't say ours, generically it's ours, is running low on food, and there's a statewide food drive taking place on Saturday. Everybody should receive one of these cool reminders on their door before then, and you can contribute. There's a couple different ways you can try to contribute food to the needs there. Also, I promised Chris Simonson that I would mention the Memorial Day celebration and service that's taken place at our Veterans Park on Memorial Day, and just put that on your calendar. It'll have all the wonderful things that they typically have with 21 gun salute, a flyover and speakers and such. And I don't see anyone from BCYC, is that true? So given that I think they weren't able to make it, I have a couple items that I'll share on their behalf. The BCYC, which is our Bountiful City Youth Council, has applications open right now for next year's service. And those applications can be found on the city website, and they're due April 15th. If you know any youth that'll be a freshman to a senior next year, we'd love to have them help and participate in various service activities and learning opportunities in the city. If they want to be on the leadership, that application is due on April 1st. And then lastly, we will have the Bountiful City Youth Council is putting on a bunny hop. That is the Saturday before Easter, and will be great for kids. This will be held at the Bountiful Town Square, which is a first time that it's been there. And so we encourage you to come and participate. It'll be fun and have all the wonderful things that we've had in the years past. That will be from 9 to 10 on April 8th. That's all.
Thank you. Councilwoman Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some updates on the South Davis Recreation District. The Recreation Board met last night. The first thing I want to announce to the public and ask everyone on the council to share is that there is a vacancy on the board. There are 3 board spots that the Davis County Commissioners get to pick to represent the unincorporated residents of the Recreation District. One of the board members has resigned, and so there is an opening. And interested applicants can apply. They need to live within the district. Certainly, it would help if they had used the facility or had an interest in the recreation facilities there. It also would be fantastic if they had a budgeting background to help with some of the challenges the district currently has in that regard. The applications from interested parties are due to the county commissioners by April 3rd. They ask for a letter of interest explaining why you would be a good candidate, and they'll follow up with interviews. So currently, all three of those at-large county-appointed folks they're not from Bountiful, even though we are the largest city in the district and have the most population. So certainly we could supply some good candidates. The other note I would just share is we hope to have a formal proposal for the additional land that might be needed in the case of a bond expansion. We've worked through that with a work group that's a subset of the council and staff, along with members of the Rec District Board. We're working on some refinements and hope that have that so that you all can see it and be aware of what those plans may look like. And discussions are still ongoing about some of the budget challenges at the Rec District. So encourage all to pay attention there as discussions continue to take place about how to make sure that budget balances.
Excellent, thank you. Councilman Higginson.
Thank you, Mayor. Nothing this evening.
Okay, we will now, because we do not have a BCYC report tonight, we'll consider approval of the expenditures greater than $1,000 and January 2023 financial report.
Mayor, I'd make a motion to approve the expenditures greater than $1,000 and the January 2023 financial report.
Second.
That's second by Councilwoman Price Hewish, and all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and now we get to do the fun part of the night, and we get to recognize Lorna Harvickson for her 33 years of service. And am I turning the time over? Okay. Tyson, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council. Excited tonight to recognize Lorna Hartvikson. I couldn't get it right either. So, Lorna, if you could please come join me. Lorna has been with the city for 36 years. She began as a part-time employee in the recreation department of the city, back when it was just a department of the city rather than its own district. And I hope Lorna doesn't mind, but I prepared a little bit of a presentation, and Galen, if you'd get that up for us.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, I mind.
Lorna has a great sense of humor, and I'm grateful that she's not going to completely ostracize me after this. But so going back to when Lorna's part-time career began in 1987, as I mentioned, she was a part-time employee for the recreation department, and she did everything from babysitting to ice monitor to anything they asked her to do.
Except for, I forgot to tell you, except for lifeguarding, because I don't swim.
So Lorna got a great exposure to the recreation side of the city back then. She then went full-time with the utilities department and began as a billing clerk, and for some time went through that. Then moved on to the treasury department as a cashier in the treasury department, and stop me if I'm getting any of this wrong, Lorna. No. So continuing on, she went as in the Treasury Department as a deputy treasurer, and as a backup for the accounts payable processing. So from there, she actually did accept a full-time position in the Finance Department as the AP clerk, and then back to the Treasury Department as a customer service representative. And so Lorna has truly seen and done a lot for the city. I think of our cashiering department as the revenue collection part of the city. So truly, without our utilities function, without our customer service representatives, we could not function. And it is telling that Lorna has been here to help us through the past 36 years of Bountiful's operations. So I asked Lorna what some of the challenges she experienced were during her 36 years at Bountiful. And she said one of the challenging aspects was trying to be a mom as a full-time employee. So Lorna not only was a full-time employee, but raised her family at the same time, which I think we can all appreciate is a very challenging task. So another thing that she remembered back on her 36 years are the people that she worked with. The amazing associations and the lasting friendships is what she mentioned. So just wanted to bring up those two aspects. I asked a few of her coworkers what comments they might have about her. So I'm going to read some of those. Lorna has been a staple of our department and has passed along so much knowledge to her coworkers. My memory of Lorna is her warm, infectious laugh. She is so kind and made the most daunting tasks fun because of her fun laugh. I'm really going to miss Lorna. Lorna was willing to put in the extra time necessary on daily work and special projects to ensure they were completed timely and accurately. She went the extra mile to help others in a personal way. This one is, I remember when I first started my job with the city, I came in and Lorna was at the front desk working her heart out and looked so serious that I was kind of afraid of her. And to think, in a very short time later, we became best friends. Not only did we work together, we spent time together away from work. She is like family to me. And lastly, one of my favorite things about working with Lorna is that she never misses an opportunity to make the day fun. Whether it be celebrating an obscure holiday or a prank she is playing, she always makes me laugh. And I think the next picture is very telling of Lorna's way of doing, of bringing enjoyment to a work environment. I can't say enough about Lorna and her service here at Bountiful City. She truly has been an integral part of our utilities and ensuring that that whole operation runs as best it can. So thankful for Lorna and her service, and wanted to recognize her in front of you this evening. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, thank you. And I would like to recognize my husband also, because he's been with me the whole time.
Lorna, we were clapping for you. Will you say that one more time?
I said, thank you very much. Also, my husband, I'd like to recognize him. He was with the city for 30 years also, and we've worked together, and we've played together, and we raised our family together.
Paul, can you come up for a minute?
It's only fair.
It is only fair.
It's only fair. Yep. We started our journey 43 years ago.
Can't imagine why, but
Yep, this is Paul.
no.
Oh,
Thank you for your service.
thank you. I was always wondering if maybe I should run for office, and now I have the time. So I might be coming after your jobs. Thank you.
Thanks, how wonderful. Spouses usually get flowers, but
Oh,
we decided to give you chocolates.
And that's his
The next best
favorite.
thing, Mindy Mints. I'd
Thank
share,
you.
but I'm not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it, wonderful.
Streets.
Yeah.
Lorna, we just appreciate you so much, and it's not only were you so expert at helping the department run properly, but you just really made it a fun place to work for all of us. So thank you so much. We'll miss you. We'll miss you. Thank you, and for her family, thank you for being here. So it's retirement week. I guess. And so now we are going to turn the time over to Charles to recognize Jim Wood.
So I'm not sure if the council's been down there to the landfill and seen Jim Wood, but he has been the fixture down there for 42 years. He's actually been there since we were digging pits in there. He dug the pits down there, and now we're up into a big mountain down there. So he's done valleys and mountains down at the landfill. Jim's also a little bit of a joker. He used to be able to, I remember the first few times I've been down there, he would take and find somewhere to jump out at me. Or he'd have this little fur that he would just put right there with a light switch where you think you're gonna do. Turn the light switch on and here's this furry thing right there. So that's been an enjoyment. So that learned us all to watch out, where's Jim at? And keep an eye on him. But he's done a great job for the city in all these years. He's always been there. He's watched the landfill. He's kept us in compliance with all the regulations that come along with that as well. He's just been a great asset to the city for all these years and well worth it for all of us and everything you've done for us. Really appreciate it. Did I say something?
Oh, boy. That's awesome.
Oh, boy. Hey, you know what? I love Bountiful City. I love West Point City more. That's where I live. I never could afford to live in Bountiful. But anyway, so grateful to have been here all this time. Okay, what's cool? Is it okay to get emotional? Because I'm really emotional. All right, when I was just a young man, about 20, 21, I got on my knees and I asked for a break in this life. And I got a job at the dump. And it's been the best. God knows where he needs to put you. He put me there, and it's been cool. I mean, there's a lot of improvements and subtitle changes and laws and regulations, and I just got to kind of like learn as I went, and it was part of an amazing group of people. So if I can't be grateful if I'm being hateful. Gratitude, the opening prayer was about gratitude. You know, I'm going to try to finish out this life with a grateful heart, because Bountiful City is giving me a paycheck and I don't even have to show up. So how cool is that? I made it to the end. And so thankful to everybody. I love you guys.
Jim, while the mayor's coming up, could we have you share with us what the greatest find you ever made at the dump was?
Okay, there was this big old boat-like looking thing, but two people got to get inside of it, and it was a pedal cart deal. And so my kids we was riding all around the neighborhoods in this boat. You wouldn't even think it was a bicycle or something. This was back years and years ago. And anyway, I really wasn't supposed to salvage, but I found a few. I've been there so long that I got 25%. I started so long ago when recycling came in, I got 25% of the take. There was only, when I applied for my own home, my first home loan, I told them I was there was the boss and I'm the assistant. That's all there was. So I used my assistant position to get my first home loan. Anyway, this is pretty cool. I love you guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim.
Jim, 42 years, that's amazing. Thank you.
Amazing.
Yeah, we appreciate you. Okay, we'll turn the time now over to Gary and Galen to recognize Alan West.
Alan, would you and Julene come up? Yeah. You won't ever have to again. Galen and I thought it would be appropriate for us to do this together a little bit.
Duet?
A little bit of a duet, yeah. You guys get to dance while we sing. I'd just like to have everybody think about what has happened technologically in 33 years. And here's the guy in the city who has overseen the bulk of the technology that we've had to adapt to and maintain and replace and reinvent. 33 years ago, I was trying to think back, no internet, no cell phones, not very many people had home computers even. And how many servers did we have back then? One server, and we have how many servers now?
62.
62 servers. No body cams for the police. Just on and on and on. The amount of technology that not only has Alan had to learn about, but has had to educate about, and has had to replace and be patient with users on, and it's pretty amazing. And he still is the smartest IT person. Like, our department is awesome. Any questions I have, I go to these guys, and he has stayed at the top of his game, and Bountiful's benefited from it. And so anyway, I'll share a couple more personal things, but Galen wanted to say a few words too, and Galen's known Alan a little bit longer than I have.
Alan has been a good friend for these many years. I've been with the city for 30, and so I've known him the whole time that I've been here. And he was in the IT department when I came as a programmer, and then moved to the IT director a few years after that. But there's one thing about Alan is he's not only technically competent, but he's also a jokester. So people would find out by sad experience sometimes if they let him go into their presentation for city council and just make sure that it flowed okay, that just out of the goodness of his heart. Well, it would be shown up on the screen, and all of a sudden, instead of somebody's picture appearing that you would expect, it was somebody like Alfred E. Newman or somebody that would show up. So you had to be careful. And so ever since then, I've been very careful about watching him when he touches my computer, just in case. But he has had, as Gary's mentioned, he's had quite the journey with the technology world. And I remember that we worked on a project together over the years, a thing or two. We did a study of citywide wireless network. You probably remember that one. And then also we put in our fiber optic network in the city that we utilize for city purposes now. And now it's morphing into something even bigger. But Alan's had a hand in all of that all along the way. And he's a good friend and has helped me out in many ways, personally as well as professionally. So congratulations, my friend.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a couple of quick memories of Alan and of Julene. Shortly after we were hired, we had our son Deacon, and we were living at West Point. Yay, Jim. We were living at West Point in the time, and we get a visit from Alan and Julene, who came out all our way and brought us a baby blanket and spent time with us and got to hold Deacon, and I'll always remember that, and it's just indicative of the individual interest that these guys take in people. Alan's been through some pretty tough personnel things, and it's been tough because he truly cares about the people that he gets to work with. And the only other thing I'd say is that Alan has a great and eclectic taste in music. One of my favorite memories is we went to a meeting in southern Utah together, 4 of us in a car, and we listened to music for like 10 straight hours there and back, swapping music, and we came up with this fantastic playlist. But it's been so fun to get to know Alan and Julene, and love you guys. Appreciate everything that you've done, and please don't be strangers. Don't come back and work, but feel free to stop in.
Thank you. Do I get to say a couple things? just wanted to reminisce about a couple things. I was in a job I really wasn't loving, and Julene found an ad in the paper, and I came and applied. Interviewed with Mark McCrae, and that I didn't hear anything. And she kept saying, call back. I said, I'm just going to say no. I'd had a rough go at trying to get jobs, and she convinced me to call. I didn't know that Mark had an employee that was a programmer that told him he was going to leave. And I called Mark, and he offered me the job. And the guy the next day came to Mark and said, I've changed my mind. I'd like to stay. So if it would have just been one day different, I might not have been here.
Wow.
Then, just before I started work, Mark McCrae called me and left a message, and I thought, that's a week before I start, what does he want? And I called him back, and he said, I wonder if you want to golf on your first day on the job, because it was the fall golf tournament. And then they had a banquet that night, and it's gone downhill from there. But a couple things that I've enjoyed. I talked to Paul Rapp today, former police chief. When I first met him, he had a ponytail down to here. He was working in the strike force. And I got in an old Toyota Supra with him, and he had to push a couple beer cans out of the way and his priesthood manual out of the way because he was trying to live the double life there. And today he said the worst part was trying to clean up his potty mouth. As far as jokes go, she scared the living whatever out of me not long ago, and we've had this going attempt to scare each other. But I had an employee years ago, I remember this today, that I took one of those air horn blasters and I taped it around the piston of his chair, and he came in and sat down, and that thing just and he jumped up and thought I had it outside his door and didn't see me, and he went down and sat down again. But I've had so many great experiences here, seeing a lot of transition. I think if I were to put a feather on my own hat, it would be the team that we have now. The city, most people don't see this, but Greg and Dan and Sheldon have done an amazing, amazing job in the last 6-7 years, transforming the security of our network, the redundancy of the backup, the servers, storage, just all kinds of things. And so I think it's very satisfying to be able to walk away and know that it's in good hands. And that was a concern for me for a long time. The other thing I thought about is just how much I appreciate Julene. The midnight calls, one night she got a call from Sergeant Ira Beal, 2 in the morning. She answers. Yeah, pre-cell phone. It's like, what do you want? Is Alan there? Who's calling? This is Sergeant Bill. We have a computer emergency. Oh, okay, sorry. But weekends and late nights and overnights, and Greg too, just, a lot of hours go into it. And also my children, I'm grateful that they're here too. But just everybody, I look around here and just so many good friendships and relationships and even connections with you up here. I've appreciated it, and thank you very much. Thanks for being a good friend.
Thank you, Alan. It's just really hard for us to say goodbye to all three of you, and it just really, what an amazing team, what an amazing group of people. And our city is no better than the people who are here, and you guys have really contributed to the city that we have. So thank you so much. Thank you all. And we understand if you need to go. So thanks for being here and for letting us honor your loved ones. We will now turn the discussion to the fiber optic project bond options discussion, and we're grateful that Jason Birmingham's here to answer questions that we have. And Gary, do I turn the time over to you, to Galen? Okay, thank you, Galen. We'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Excited to bring this to you tonight. This is kind of the next step from the presentations that have been made before about the fiber optic network system that is being designed for Bountiful. The council and gave us direction as staff to proceed with contracting with Utopia Fiber for that design, construction, engineering, and all that will go into that. Once that contract, which we are in the process of reviewing a draft contract, is set, and with council approval, we'll be going forward with a construction project. But ahead of that, necessary to take care of funding of that project. And so tonight we wanted to bring to you options for bonding for all the aspects of that project. And as the mayor mentioned, Jason Birmingham, our financial advisor, is with us tonight and has a presentation. But just briefly, you should have a staff report that is in your packet that outlines 3 options that we have met. Tyson, Beck, and myself and Gary have met with Jason over the past few months, and receiving the data from him on what might be possible for funding the project. There's basically 3 aspects that could be, or options that could be pursued. One would be a subscriber-based revenue-only bond, which would mean that the bond issue would be issued with only subscriber revenues paying that back. That's what we would advertise to the public. And that would carry a market rate that would be higher than other options. And the rating, based on how the market is going now, would be probably a non-rated issue. And the second option is a subscriber-based revenue bond, but it would be with a backing or a stated backing of either excise tax or sales tax. In this case, we're saying sales tax. That would carry a much lower rate, probably in the 4%, 4.25% range. And the rate that it would be offered at in the market would probably be a AA plus rating. And then the third option would be a straight sales tax revenue bond issue that would be the highest rating, likely AAA, and then with 3.8 to 4% interest rate. And Jason has more illustrations to go over there. I like to think of this from both sides of the issue. We don't often in Bountiful issue debt. We quite often purchase debt for our investment portfolio. And for a number of years, I was personally involved with that, and I do occasionally place trades, but that's usually our city treasurer that does that. When we make the decision to purchase something on behalf of the city, we want to make sure it's the highest quality debt instrument that is out there, because we're relying on the safety, liquidity, and aspects of that bond issue that will enable us to get our money back plus some interest on it. What we typically get presented are things that have high credit ratings, and those high credit ratings come from a very solid base of support underneath that debt instrument. In this case, where we are now the issuer, while the market would look at this and say this is a wonderful project, as an investor, you're looking at it and saying, that's great, and I think that's a wonderful thing, and I'll probably buy it if I have a little bit more appetite for something that may not have as much of a underpinning as if I can't have the funding be paid back with revenue from the project, I could always fall back on something like sales tax. Now, the number 2 option and the number 3 option are simply guaranteeing it like you would your own personal loan, saying that I'm good for paying that back. But the reality is that the take rates and other aspects of this project seem to be, from the projections we've been given, sufficient that we would be able to pay those bond payments back by revenue, regardless of how it's backed. So it would, if it is a funding option that we choose, if we choose to go forward with either straight sales tax backing or revenue with the sales tax backstop, then it would still be written into the bond covenants and by policy to pay it back through the revenues that are generated. and it would only be a backstop if we couldn't do that. The projections we're receiving are very favorable in terms of being able to do it with the subscriber-only revenues. It is a little bit nuanced by what the market is looking for in doing these debt issuances. And so Jason has much more to say about it than what I've said, and has some slides to go through. So I'll just turn the time over to him unless you have any questions initially.
I think we can go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Mayor, City Council, it's a privilege and a pleasure to be here this evening. I appreciate the introduction by Galen relative to this particular issue. I know this has been one of the main discussion points that the city has had for, I know, a number of years now. Maybe just a little bit of background. Our firm has been heavily involved in fiber telecommunication debt structures for the past, 20 years since we've seen many of these originate, and in many cases started with municipal oriented systems. It's amazing to me. We've done this in as far away as Virginia, Texas, Michigan, Arizona, Utah. The last one that we did was in Bozeman, Montana. And so we've got some spectrum of, experience that has helped us kind of put together the narrative tonight that we wanted to share with you. Of course, I think it's always on the minds of elected officials of how do we best use resources to finance infrastructure that's important to and incumbent upon us to provide to our residents. I know there's dialogue back and forth in terms of whether this is a core infrastructure improvement. As I have seen economic development occur in many places, I can certainly indicate that fiber optics is a very important, critical component of how we see economic growth happen. It's become even more vital for us as individuals, residents, as we look for those opportunities. So acting in the capacity as a fiduciary, a financial advisor to the city, we were asked to explore what are ways in which a city might approach their own fiber or telecommunications system. And there is a myriad of ways. I think of general obligation bonds. I think of revenue bonds, lease revenue bonds. Those are probably the three primary types of vehicles that municipalities use for all types of core infrastructure improvements, whether that's water, sewer, roads. There's elements that could be funded with each one of those mechanisms. Now, although general obligation bonds carry the full faith and credit pledge of an underlying municipality by virtue of pledging that ad valorem property tax, it is a voter referendum, so it's voter required in order to go through that process. And there is not a huge benefit in terms of the interest rate versus some types of revenue bonds. So as we focused on this, because of the timing of your particular project and the need to move forward, we focused more on three major structures. And they're all revenue bond structures. I think Galen did a good job at just describing a little bit of what the unique nature of each of those are. But in each of those cases, they've been used in many certain circumstances, like I said, throughout the country. What is most appealing, typically an appealing way to approach it, is to look at the system revenues. And to determine, is there sufficient revenues that we can support debt issuance? So that's a fundamental first step. Do you have enough system revenues? Do you believe that you'll have enough system revenues to be able to pay the debt service associated with the bond issue? The second, though, is not only is there sufficient revenues, but how does the municipal market, how does the marketplace, for any type of security, how does it react to the type of credit that is in the marketplace? And so there are various levels. I think Galen was describing, again, various levels of credit quality. So investors look at that, and we have rating agencies in the municipal marketplace. You, I'm sure, have heard Moody's, Standard & Poor's, Fitch. Those are traditional national credit bureaus that rate municipal debt. And so bond investors, like any of us that invest, have a risk tolerance level for the amount of risk that they're willing to tolerate based on the investment. And so the myriad of opportunities that we're looking at tonight kind of gives you the spectrum of what would be maybe the most politically, well, I don't want to call it even politically, but more palatable because it's just a system-backed revenue. We're not pledging anything else, no other risk to the city residents, our general fund or anything. It's just system-driven. To the spectrum on the other side of credit enhancing it, in essence, the city's saying, yes, we plan on using system revenues to pay this. That is our plan of finance. But as a backstop to you as investors, we're going to credit enhance that because this is our system. We're not going to allow it to go into default. So we use vehicles like excise tax revenues. Now, excise tax is just a way to say sales and use tax, or it could be franchise tax, or it could be a combination of both. So if we can go to the next slide, make that, yeah, that's perfect. So I think we've kind of got into this now in terms of what I think some of the key critical assumptions that I want to make sure that we're kind of thinking through as we talk tonight. First of all, we're using the same assumption in any one of these scenarios, meaning that we believe that $45 million, it might be 45 million and change, but $45 million is the amount of construction proceeds that the city would need to deploy the system, to construct it, implement it, install it. On top of that 45 million are the costs, parameters of the debt. There are some issuance costs. In some cases, there's even a debt service reserve fund that bond investors would require to be set aside in case there wasn't sufficient subscription revenue to pay that. Now, that debt service reserve fund is a cost, but it ultimately gets released to pay the last payment of the bond issue. So it's kind of a cost, but it's also, you know, a security for that last payment. Also wanted to reference that in any of these schedules that we reviewed, we assume that we'll start construction mid-July. Mid-July. It could be August, it could be later than that, but for purposes of our analysis, we've assumed that July would be a construction start point. We've also modeled it so tonight we're going to show 25-year and 30-year scenarios, meaning that that would be the length of the amortization. Again, the philosophy of bonds being a pay-as-you-use, so it would be over the course of that residents, or I should say subscribers to the system, would actually be paying for that over time. So 25, 30-year options. And we do assume particular bond ratings based on that level of secure investment. And I want to go into that just a little bit. So in the table right below the first one, you'll see three options. Option 1, 2, and 3. The first line item is the security for the bonds. So that's what legally is actually pledged to a bondholder. So in option 1, it's only secured by the system revenues. So there's no other recourse from a bondholder. They can't go after the city's general fund. They couldn't, you know, they couldn't mandate or require the city to use any other revenues. Those bonds, the second line item is that assumed rating. I do have, I thought it might be, sorry, I should have handed that out earlier. The second item is the rating. So what would be the assumed rating given a revenue pledge? Now, there have been very few system-only revenue bonds that have been issued for telecommunications. We've done 3 of the 6 throughout the nation. The last one we did was in Bozeman, Montana. We closed in December of last year. we had a very difficult time finding bond investors. The market was better then than it is now, but we had a difficult time convincing them of the third-party feasibility study as well as the take rates. And what they view ultimately as the risk is the incumbent players in the market, the bigger for-profit firms that we all know aren't doing much, but that's the perspective that some of the bond investors have, is that it isn't like you're running an electric utility, although that's closer to a good example, but it's not like a water and sewer, where you are, in essence, the service provider. There really isn't, private entities that provide that service. So from their perspective, they look at it, and I would say this is the same way Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch looks at it. And believe me, we've taken it to them. We've had roadshow after roadshow to convince the rating agencies that a system revenue pledge is a good credit and that it should be rated. To no avail, we haven't received a benefit there, and so they are non-rated, meaning that the investor pool that would want to invest in those are risk tolerant, more risk tolerant. In fact, they want higher yields. So they're looking to stretch how much yield they can get even though they're taking more risk. And so those bonds carry a much different set of covenants and also interest rate associated with that. And I'm going to go through those in a little more detail. Option 2 here was described. It still is a pledge of the system revenues, but in addition to the system revenues, the city would say if there is ever a shortfall in payment, we would also legally be bound to make it up with excise tax revenues. Now that, in this case, could be legally pledged as franchise tax, it could be franchise and sales tax, but it would come with a more firm security pledge of that. Now with that, and the only minor difference between this and scenario 3 would be the market perception. The market would view that there's still risk of the system revenues, even though you're willing to backstop it, you're really not putting that as the first lien pledge, you're putting something else. So we've done, those have probably been the main ones that have been done, and they would be rated AA+, would be our estimate based on the city's coverage that they would have on the debt service coverage, and I'm also going to describe that a little bit. The third option, so that's AA+, and that would be a much better rating, so it's also a much lower interest rate that investors would be willing to take for that. The third option would be the far spectrum of what would be the most cost effective. If there wasn't any other considerations of, optics or whatnot, what would we do to achieve the lowest cost? And that would be just a straight excise tax pledge. We would still indicate to bond purchasers, the plan is still to use system revenues. We won't use any other general fund revenues to the extent that there is adequate, system revenues, but you ultimately have a legal pledge, a first lien pledge on the excise tax revenues. Again, whether that's sales tax, franchise tax, or a combination of both. Based on that, then it's a traditional, just straightforward, that's a sales tax bond. Bountiful City would be AAA. It would be the highest credit rating, and therefore the purchasers of that would be the most risk-averse investors would be looking at that, and they're just wanting to make sure they get their principal and interest back, they get it paid on time, and they believe that you are the least risk option that they could buy in the market. So those are the three options. Let's go to the next slide, if we could, Galen. So I know it's in your packet, it's also on the screen. So here's the options in terms of just kind of a quick summary of a 25-year. So each of these are 25-year amortizations and a 30-year amortization. So again, they're laid out so you can compare option 1, option 2, option 3 under a 25-year. You can also compare option 1, 2, and 3 under a 30-year perspective. So let me just flash through the 25-year, and then you have the same, rubrics, if you will, for the 30-year. The assumed rating, so as we talked, non-rated for a system-only pledge, AA+ for the system revenue but backstopped with the excise tax, AAA for the excise tax pledge. The debt service reserve fund, that's an additional thing that the marketplace requires. If they feel like there's more risk than what they would traditionally accept, they would also require that to be capitalized out of bond proceeds. So you'll notice that there is a requirement for the non-rated, the higher yield non-rated bond. And so the next item down below that is the par amount of bonds issued. You notice is 50 million, almost what, 50,720,000 there, versus some of the other options are much lower. It's because in addition to the 45 million of construction proceeds, we also have to build on top of that a debt service reserve fund. So we're actually borrowing that money up front. So that's why the bond size would be 50 million, and it would net us 45 million of construction proceeds. Does that make sense? So there's additional costs on top of just the construction costs. And I'm just going to go through the rest of option 2 and then go to the other options. As you follow it down, what we measure, and oftentimes you think of an annual, how often have you heard of an annual percentage rate? A lot of times we have these APRs with consumer debt, mortgages, and so forth. TIC is kind of a municipal equivalent to like an APR. It's like an annual percentage rate. What is my real true cost, my interest cost that I'm paying over the life of the bonds? Option 1 in today's market, so these are as of yesterday, it would, on a 25-year basis, it would be 6.3% would be the annual percentage rate. So it'd be your true interest cost on the bonds that you borrow. The all-inclusive cost is another way to also bring in any of the cost of issuance. So any of the underwriter's fees, any of the rating fees, any of the financial advisor, trustee, bond counsel fees. So it does tick it up a little bit because that's an addition to the 45 million as well as the debt service reserve fund. So you can see there's about 6, I call it basis points, but there's a 6 of, goes from 6.30 to 6.36. So all-inclusive cost is your all-in total cost of this debt. If you were to just net present value it based on an interest rate, that's what that $45 million would cost you. That makes sense? So you're borrowing a lot more than 45, you're borrowing 50 or so, but the true interest cost or all-inclusive cost of getting that 45 million is 6.36%. So then the next one, what do I pay over the life of these bonds? Now, I'll preface that 95% of municipal bonds are not held till maturity. They are refunded almost always prior to their maturity date. It used to be that we had the ability, the IRS permitted the ability to do advance refundings, where we could do it in advance of the call date. Most of these bonds would essentially, if I'm a bond purchaser, I could purchase these, and for 10 years, no one could take me out of that position. I would have that yield, and you couldn't pay those back. That's the same way it is now. We used to have the ability to advance refund those so that we could do them in advance of when the call date was. So the 99 million, which is the next line item, that's if this debt was held for the full 25 years. So I wanted to preface that most municipal debt is not held for the full 25 years. It's almost always typically refinanced after the call date with the idea that it reduces savings. But this is the apples to apples comparison. If you just, these 3 debts were held till their maturity, it's going to cost on the first option $99.2 million. The difference, you got 50 million in principal. The difference with the 99 is the rest of it is interest cost. Well, what is that on an average annual basis? It would be $3.9 million annually that you would have to cover with system revenues. Or if system revenues weren't sufficient, then you'd backstop it with the other pledge. Then you can see the bond issuance costs, which are captured in the all-inclusive percent. So quickly, option 2 and 3, you can see those compared. There wouldn't be a debt service reserve fund required. We actually issue less par amount of bonds because right now, those investors that want the high grade are actually paying a premium to get that. So they're paying you more in bond proceeds than what they're getting in par amount because they want the security of that investment. So in our case, in option 2, you'd issue $42 million, but you would still net, by virtue of the original premium that they pay, you'd still get $45 million in construction costs. You'd still cover the $473,000 of cost of issuance. You would also get that at 4.26% on the TIC and 4.32% on the all-inclusive cost. And you can see there's a $26 million in difference of the total principal and interest costs that you would pay over the life of the bonds. So $45 million is your total project cost. This is more than half of it would go to bond investors under option 1 versus option 2. Option 3 is just a little better. As I mentioned, the distinction between AAA and AA. But you can follow the math, 4.13, 4.19, a little less in total principal and interest. The average payment is just over 2.9 million, and the cost of issuance are just slightly less. Any questions on that table in particular? The 30-year amortization just lengthens it out, so it does make the debt a little lower for debt service coverage purposes, but it does, you can see it requires more total P&I over the time. And that's just the nature of spreading it out. Any questions, Mayor, City Council, on that particular? Okay. Let's go to the next one. One of the very important components in the marketplace is, so how do you achieve the AA plus? Is it just by virtue of you're just great city, which I live here, and it is a great city, and there's no question it's AAA just on that basis. But the market looks at debt service coverage as a way that they evaluate how do we come up with a ratio or a statistic that we can compare you against any other community. Now, I've simplified it here and just said the debt service coverage ratio is kind of the only thing that matters. It really isn't the case. Population, economics, general location, all of the things that you would take into account are there. But in terms of debt service coverage, it's probably one of the most important statistics to them. So if you can maintain a coverage level, does everyone understand what a debt service coverage level is? Let me describe it like, let's say your system revenues generate after you've paid for the operation and maintenance of the system. Let's say that revenue stream was $1 million. And let's say that your debt service was $500,000. So your debt service coverage ratio based on that would be 2 times debt service coverage. You had $1 million for your $500,000. So each of these are representative that way. Now, the reason we haven't run or projected any debt service coverage on option 1 is because I really don't have the data and the information. I don't know what the system revenues are. When we do system-only bonds, we heavily rely on a third-party feasibility study. We have to go to the marketplace with someone else, not related to the bond, saying, you're going to hit these take rates. You're going to be able to, get this subscriber base. Then we would know better what the coverage would be there. But we do know on option 2 and 3 very easily because we know what your sales tax revenue, franchise tax revenue is. So for simplicity, assuming the $45 million are issued on both 25 and 30 year, you have significant coverage. So it just shows you got 3.9 times coverage, 3.95 all the way up to 4.26 times coverage. In terms of all of your other qualities and characteristics, anything above about a 2% or 2 times or 2.25 times would almost assuredly get you in the AAA category. So as a frame of reference, the fact that you're almost 4 times, even with this debt, would put you safely in the AAA area. So that's why debt service coverage is important. That's why we assume that it's AA plus or AAA is based on that particular component. So the last page, I don't know if that's maybe not the last page, but what are some considerations that I thought the city ought to really think about when you evaluate these options? The first one, I think, is clear. It's always been clear to me that your plan of finance for this doesn't change under any of the options. To me, the city's plan of finance is system revenues, subscribers are going to pay for what they use. And that's not going to change under any of the options. That's your core, in my mind, your core belief of how this makes sense to do. However, even though that's the same under any of the conditions, your access to capital is much different depending on what you pledge. So the second, excise tax revenues of city provide shortfall for system revenues. I wish it wasn't the case. We have seen scores of feasibility studies that have suggested that take rates had been far exceeding even what the feasibility reports have been. Notwithstanding that, we've worked on this 15, 17 plus years to convince the bond market, rating agencies that they could do it on that basis. Now, it still wouldn't be rated AAA, AA plus, but it might be in an investment grade, BBB or higher, A perhaps. Right now, there's just no willingness to do that. And so option 2 and 3, if those project revenues aren't sufficient, you're in essence telling the market, we'll cure the shortfall so that timely payments are made, we'll cure the shortfall. That doesn't mean, though, that the city doesn't rely upon the system to replenish or repay that back. You would have loan agreements, you'd have other things set up so that subscribers are still paying their way. It just may not be in the time that's timely for the bonds. I hope you got an illustration from the previous slide for the third point. Structured credit enhancement on these particular types of transactions do significantly reduce the overall cost. I don't see that much of a difference typically in the municipal world when you talk about a $45 million project for the options to be as much as $20+ million difference. So it's significant, that credit enhancement. I've always felt that if your commitment to the system is what I typically see municipalities, which is if we're going to build a system, we're going to stand behind it. To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to pay another $25, $26, $24 million to say, oh, we haven't pledged another security, when in essence, if those revenues weren't sufficient, my belief is you'd probably do as much as you could do to ensure that you don't go into default. Most cities, I would believe, that would do that. So that's a big point. I think you need to look at that in terms of how much overall savings is related to that, even though fundamentally system revenues are the way in which you want to fund this. The next point is probably, just the same kind of point in elevated costs, but if you think about it this way, the more you elevate the debt service, the harder it's going to be for your subscriber revenues to meet. So you're kind of hurting yourself by not having the lower cost, because now the market's going to expect, I think in the one example, it was almost $1 million annually more for that option versus the other. So where does that $1 million go? Well, it doesn't go to subscribers, it doesn't go to the city, it goes to bond investors, it goes to bondholders, those high-yield bondholders. So to me, that's something to think about here as well. Now, there are a couple, I think, important downsides that have to be considered here. A city with a lot of growth and a lot of need to finance capital projects in the future, you need to be careful how you use this tool, because you're limited with priorities. You can only do so much. There's a capacity driven by virtue of this debt service coverage. So when you look at options 2 and 3, yes, it's the highest credit, it's gonna be the most cost-effective way to do it, but it also limits your ability for future projects to use the same financing vehicle. Bountiful historically has not been a frequent bond issuer. For some of utilities, it has. For general purposes, it really hasn't. I mean, you did have your general obligation bond for our Washington Elementary and other park project. But historically, we're not frequent issuers in the marketplace. But I think that's an important measure that you need to be conscious of, that if you issue bonds secured by those sources, it could take some of your capacity in which you could meet other project needs if they were to come up. The last one is just the idea of maintaining that healthy credit rating. It is impacted. You could lever yourself up to the point of that 2 times coverage, or right to that edge where I could see your rating could dip. You know, it could go from AAA down to AA or A by virtue of how much leverage you use. So the 2 times coverage, 2.25 to 2.0 coverage, is kind of the bare minimum to maintain that credit rating. So to me, that's another important factor of, if I'm looking at my capital projects plan and I've got parks and rec and I've got roads and I've got all these other things, and I think sales tax or excise tax will be a vehicle to help me bond for those, I'll want to run pro forma to make sure I'm not declining that, you know, capacity too much where it would hurt me there. Does that make sense on those factors? The last, I think I'm about to my last slide, second to last slide, if we can go there. What does it translate into take rate? I think this is an interesting illustration. With the excise tax bond on the 25 or the 30 year, it's basically a 50%, let's say 46%, 46.7% to 50.4% take rate needed to service the 25 and the 30 year under the excise tax pledge. On the system revenue only, substantially different, right? We raise our debt service by about $1 million a year, and now our take rates go to, you know, we're pushing 65 to 70% take rates needed in order to cover that. So I think back to that illustration in my mind of, if we're committed to the system, does it make sense to get the lowest cost? In my mind, it does, because I think it helps in the take rates and the risk profile of what you might see. Now, remember, I said that the factors also, you got to think of, well, do I have other debt that's going to come up? Do I have other needs? Am I limiting those? All those things need to be taken into account as well. But to me, there's a significant difference that is going to have to be recouped with subscriber costs. And if you push yourself too much out of the marketplace, then you're going to have a hard time being successful with a subscription-based, you know, model. So, you know, the type of structure that you issue debt upon does make a big deal in terms of this. The last slide that I was just going to briefly review was, what does it take to go through the process? What would your time frame look like? And again, I was working backwards. The first of this, I said, well, I'm going to assume that you need proceeds in about the middle part of July. That can move. This is just more of how much time would it take. One of the things that we recommend before you expend too much money anywhere is a reimbursement resolution. It's a simple resolution that just says, to the extent you issue bonds in the future, the IRS will allow you to reimburse costs that you've already spent out of bond proceeds. If you don't have a reimbursement resolution, some of those costs you can't capture back. You're not able to reimburse yourself. So we almost always advise a reimbursement resolution. We've contemplated that could be as early as March 28th. The second, and really the critical decision point for the city, would be what I've indicated here is a super parameters resolution. What that is an authorization that the city council determines what the parameters of the debt would be. So not only the security, like the excise tax or a system revenue only, but also what's the maximum par amount that you would allow to be issued? What's the maximum term, 25, 30 years? What's the maximum interest rate? So you set a very defined limit, and then typically what's done in a super parameters resolution is there is designation given to certain officers of the city to execute within those parameters so that we can go to the marketplace when it's good. For instance, yesterday I went to the market. It was great because it wasn't great from that perspective. Let me say it in a different way. Silicon Bank was a bad thing, very sad thing. But interest rates went down by 25 basis points. So I saved 25 basis points on a transaction yesterday that I could go into the market and take advantage of right then. Today, it's back up another 10 basis points, and who knows where we're headed for the Federal Open Market Committee that meets later in the month. So the super parameters resolution is a nimble method or a way in which we can take advantage of the marketplace. And what that is you set the parameters, but then typically the mayor or a designated officer is allowed to be able to execute within a certain parameter in order to make that work. If that were held or done, there's also a public hearing requirement. So unlike a GO bond where you'd have to wait for an election cycle, you'd have to wait to get on November, the latest I think you could do is maybe August, mid-August in order to meet in November. Revenue bonds have a different public process. Theirs is a public hearing. So you'd have to notice a public hearing, you'd have to hold a public hearing. What I've contemplated here would be June 13th, and that would give residents, interested parties, anyone, they would receive, it would go on the Utah public notice website. It would, you could even go beyond that and put it in, newsletter, you could put it in the paper, you could do whatever you want to get the word out, but it would need to be held where a public hearing gives an opportunity for residents to, provide input, to give you an idea of, well, we like this, or we don't like this, or we don't want to see this used to support it, or any of those things would be your benefit to see the lens of what are other people seeing in terms of that. But it does only require that one public hearing. So it's just a one public hearing, several public meetings, but only one public hearing would be required. We typically then secure the bond rating within weeks after the public hearing's held. So we would go to a Standard & Poor's, a Moody's, a Fitch, maybe a couple of them, and they would rate the credit. We'd give them all the information packet. They would see the financials. They would talk with Gary and Galen, and they would visit about what their perspective is on the market, and then they would give us a rating. Again, we're projecting that that's AA+ on the one option, AAA on the other, and we feel really confident about that. We assume that that would be received around the end of June. After we receive that, then any time after that point, we can actively market the transaction. So think of securities. They're regulated, heavily regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. We're under the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board as well as FINRA, which is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, all of which prescribe that I can't offer it to anybody in the marketplace unless I offer it with a prospectus. That makes sense. So you've got to have a document that formally, legally is a marketing tool that you put out into the market. And so we have bond counsel. We draft a lot of that, put that together, and that's what goes out to prospective investors. Of course, it has the bond rating on it. It has the terms. All those things are there. But that's when we say bond pricing and signing of the bond purchase agreement, it's more than just July 11th. It's probably a week and a half period of time when we're actively talking to investors, getting their interest, getting an idea of what their interest rate would be, and then that's consummated or finalized on July 11th. Then typically to get all the legal paperwork and everything put together, we take a week, and then we close on the bond. So in this case, July 18th, we deliver proceeds, the city would start the construction of the project. In order to go down that path, the last item that I mentioned here was we work very closely with the city staff to select the key people that you would need to make this work, which would include bond and disclosure counsel, trustee, rating agency, an underwriter. There are a couple of different ways that you could approach the sale of the bonds, either through a competitive sale or a negotiated sale, which I won't go into the detail, but there's different ways of procuring that. But you build a finance team in order to go through this timeline so that you can execute the transaction. So hopefully that gives you a little sense that it isn't overnight, but it also doesn't take, forever. It doesn't take years, doesn't take, I think 3 or 4 months is a good, perspective to take to get this all completed. With that, the last slide, I will just give you some perspective. This is a 10-year perspective of what the U.S. Treasury, 10-year Treasury notes and 30-year Treasury bonds have done. We're at the highest point. We're at the highest point that we've been in the last 10 years. I wish I would have had time to put the 20-year graph together because we're in the midpoint if it's 20 years. If I go beyond this 10 years, we're actually about where traditionally the 20-year rates have been on both the 10 and 30 years. So from our short-term experience, we're looking at this going, oh no, what did we borrow the GO bonds at? 2%, crazy how low it was at that time, and rates are higher now, significantly. But in the longer perspective, they're more stabilized at what we've seen over a 20 or 25-year perspective. But interest rates have been going up. So some of our concern is, what does happen with the overall, economy? What is the Fed's changing the Fed fund rates and what they're trying to accomplish with that? One good sign today was they still want to be able to exercise their aggressiveness with the Fed. So what did they do? They told banks that now we'll let you value your bond portfolio on stated value, not current value. So now all of a sudden banks are going to be bailed out by virtue of how they're telling them they can calculate it. So to me, it's a way for them to help banks, but at the same time, they can keep their aggressive stance with raising the Fed funds rate, which I would anticipate we're going to see, another 50 basis points, maybe even 75 basis point increase. So rates are trending up, as you can see over the last little while. Until the bank issues that came up, they were going up. Then they came down, fell quite a bit, and then they just slowly inched back up yesterday. Well, really today. So anything else, Galen, Gary, or anything else that I maybe missed covering?
That was such a great overview. Thank you so much. What questions do you have, Council?
Someone else going. Thank you. This was
Yeah.
very, very informative and very helpful for me to put things into context. I'm just curious. Did you say Bozeman? Is it Bozeman or Bozeman? Bozeman.
Yeah, I call it Bozeman, but it could be. I could be corrected that it's Bozeman.
It's like Nevada. Did you say, did I remember correctly, that they essentially did what would be similar to option one?
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know why they went with that, especially when their population-wise were similar. Were they a city-owned network as well?
Yeah, so one little nuance there is that the city was the issuer, but the owner-operator and technically the owner-operator is a 501c3 nonprofit that was created by the city and local residents. That makes sense. So they had a unique structure, so the 501c3 in that particular case is like the Utopia, like the UIA, and own and operate it, whereas Bozeman doesn't technically own and operate it. So another model, has frequently been used in Utah has been the UIA model, the Utah, interlocal agency that's basically a Utopia financing tool that they own it, operate it, but you enter into an agreement that backstops it. So, it's a tool, but they've had similar difficulty. They haven't been able to get theirs rated, even though they've been able to basically be able to combine all the other issues that they have for different cities, and they have revenue streams that cover above and beyond that. Even with that, the last issue they were able to get rated on a system-only pledge was AAA or triple B minus. And that was the only system-only pledged deal that has been ever rated. And it was UIA, and it was based on all of the UIA deals and all the revenues that are commingled. So West Point, West Haven, Clearfield, and then all of the Utopia cities, Layton, Orem, all of those are basically commingled, and that's how they got to a triple B minus. So in terms of Bozeman, a couple of factors. It was a system-only pledge. We had a third-party feasibility study. It did show that the take rates were fairly small in order to meet the debt. I mean, 29 to 32%, something like that. They've actually forecast that would be 50, 60%. When we went to the rating agencies, several factors, but Bozeman have some of those incumbent risks too, like the CenturyLinks, Xfinity or others that they viewed as problematic. They don't want to have cities with stranded debt if, those guys come in and do something. We've seen it for 20 years. We don't see them going to do anything. There's no reason why they would deploy capital and try to service that debt when there are other options that are out there. So we've had that discussion, but it's still viewed as a risk. In their particular case in Bozeman, we went out to market December, I think it was 8th. We were in the marketplace until about December 14th. It was a $60 million transaction. We had 100 investors that initially, when I say investors, they're mostly institutional investors, so like BlackRock, PIMCO, Invesco, large mutual fund names that put interest in. When we got to the actual pricing, after they'd looked at the prospectus and so forth, we were undersubscribed. We only had 10 investors, and only 2 of them put in enough orders to take down about 45% of the bonds. So we then had to go back and reprice the bonds. We were already at about 200 basis points, 2% higher than what a non-rated typical transaction would be, and we had to raise it another 0.5% to bring a few more investors in order to get it underwritten. So in that case, we thought we'd have enough investors. Once we got to the market, the investors weren't there. They saw more risk than, I guess they felt like there was more risk than they had thought. And the only way we were able to get them back to the table was to raise the interest rates higher.
So may I ask a follow-up to that? So Bozeman was triple B.
They were non-rated.
They were
just
non-rated.
like yours, yeah.
And then, so what, for the other 3 cities, you said there were 6 total, and then that you've done 3 of them. Were those also non-rated, those other 2 cities?
Yes, all of them are non-rated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, non-rated. So the only rated transaction was the interlocal agency of UIA on their own bond issue. And it was because of all the commingled revenues that they share from all those agreements that they have that gives them tons of coverage, basically, is how they got there. And even then, they got to triple B minus.
Okay, thank you.
What other questions do we have?
I have a question for you, Jason. So since your firm has done so many of these using option 2, it sounds like mostly, and option 3 maybe as a second most common, have any of the cities had to actually use their tax revenues as a backstop?
No, with one exception, and I would say two exceptions. One of the things that are part of this, and we talked to the staff, more specific, is the timing of when you get the subscription revenue. You got to build it out. It's going to take a certain amount of time to build out. Well, bond investors, when you give the bond proceeds, still want a payment not too far in the distance. They don't always just wait. So what we do so that we avoid that in most structures is we build in capitalized interest, where we actually borrow the money so we can make the bond payments during our subscription phase. We did have one city that just didn't get enough capitalized interest in there. They didn't meet their construction slowed down. The subscriber revenues didn't come in, so they had to go to their excise tax in order to cover that. The subscriber revenue, once it did come in, they replenished it and paid it back to the, to the general fund. But, so in fairness, yes, they used it. My feeling was they didn't estimate their construction time frame very well. Now, as we've met and talked about here, that's another cost of capitalized interest, because you're borrowing money to pay interest, so you're basically borrowing to pay more interest. So there is a cost of that. So the city, because of the capital project funds and so forth, the thought is we ought to just put up our own capitalized interest fund. In essence, we'll make the payments, then replenish it or repay it with the user fees once they're subscribed and come in. So we won't borrow from the market to have that cash flow. We'd maybe just use it out of current revenues, so we don't have to borrow that, but we would get it paid back. So, but that can be structured different ways, Kate. It could be capitalized in the bond fund. I would say 80%, that's how they do it. The other 20 might just use capital project funds that they have on hand.
Can you, I'm just curious how we compare to those cities. Do you know the names of those cities offhand?
Of the
two that weren't able to make their payments, had to use their...
I think it was West Point, and it might have been Clearfield.
And to the best of your knowledge, did they
replenished
they
it.
able to catch back up within?
Yeah, and they were really only about 6 months later than what they anticipated. So their bond payment, so I guess that's an important distinction here too. When we go to the bond market to issue any of these, typically a bond investor wants their first principal, or not principal, but interest payment within 6 months of the issue date. Sometimes we can stretch it out to a year. But if your first payment's a year and you don't have subscriber revenues yet and you haven't billed capitalized interest, well, what's going to make that bond payment? The investor's still going to want the bond payment. So that's where we use capitalized interest. And it was just, in the case of, I think, West Point and Clearfield, it was just miscalibrated the actual construction timing and got 4 months or 6 months less capitalized interest than they ended up needing. So they had to use other funds, but it got replenished.
Can I ask two questions kind of associated with that? So say it was 6 months that the city had to pay in that example, or a year. So are we looking at 2.7 million or $1.5 million for 6 months if we need to come up with that out of our general fund?
I think that's a fair observation, council member. Yeah, and the detailed...
Looking at page 3.
I don't have the detailed schedule in your packet. It is in the packet that I know will come to you. But you are, yeah, you're correct. The first payment under, let's just pick...
that was the cheapest one, the bottom right. If we were to do a 30-year, so that would be the bare minimum if we miscalculated or didn't have the take rates. The average annual debt service line, is that, am I looking at the right?
So I've got a more detailed schedule that breaks it out, but so your first bond payment on that lowest cost option is actually, we assume we issued July 18th, 23. The first interest payment would be January 1st of 2024, and the total amount would be $937,000.
Okay.
Now, depending on when subscriber revenue can start to come in, depends on, so then your next payment, to your question, there is that $937,000 payment in January. Then the next July, 24, has both a principal and interest payment, and that would be in the amount of $1,890,000. So when you add those two together, you get close to the 2.7.
Bonds get paid, instead of monthly, they get paid every 6 months.
Yeah, so principal annually, interest semi-annually.
Okay.
Yep.
And then in those two cities that you referenced, what was their proposed or anticipated take rates?
I think they were 37, maybe one case was 37, one was 32.
So much less than what we're needing. Your proposed.
Now, when I say take rates, their take rates are, no, that's fair, yeah. That's what they needed, a minimum to service the debt, yep.
And so on page 6, you've identified maybe the best option take rate of 46.7%.
Yes, it looks like based on the revenues that would need to come, and I'm assuming that's 16,000 households, or 16,000 households and change, so.
Yeah,
it's
that assumes only residential subscriptions. So that doesn't include
Oh, okay,
additional, so this is sort of a worst-case scenario from Utopia. If you add commercial subscriptions onto that, that would reduce the required take rate.
How many commercial properties do we have in Bountiful?
And I'm afraid I don't know that.
and
Utopia would-
it's a weighted average difference too, because what their subscription cost would be based on the service they get versus residential is a factor much different. I mean, where you make the most system revenues is from your commercial connections, your commercial subscribers.
We don't have a lot of commercial properties in Bountiful.
No.
Yeah, I'm just saying from the magnitude, even if 16,000 residents, let's say it was 2,000 businesses, it's possible that the 2,000 businesses are almost as much revenue as the 16,000. I mean,
I'm
not.
pretty sure I have that
quite.
number for Utopia, what Utopia proposed, and I was thinking like 400. Maybe off. So anyway.
Yeah.
46.7% take rate. I think.
For residents, yeah, for residential, agreed, yeah. I think that's correct.
Does that number concern you?
Not described as residential only. I mean, I'd obviously like to see the commercial embedded into that and to see what, that take rate looks like. But, most of the places we've seen easily 40% without much marketing activity. 60%, 50 to 60%, I think's a pretty high threshold to hit.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the staff report on May 24th, and the highest one on here is a rural city, Morgan. I think it's the highest one. Nope, Linden is 62. I don't know how long does anyone know how long their fiber's been in place?
Oh, 15 years.
So it took them 15 years to get to 62%.
Yeah, I don't know, they were they had the highest take rate right out of the chute. My guess is they had that pretty early on.
Centerville, they've been 15 years too.
Yeah.
They're at 47%.
Now, is that just residential?
It's what UTopia
Okay.
provided us.
Yeah.
Residential.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, the residential makes sense to me, some of those numbers.
Just-
on a combined basis, you know, the 29, 32%, when you get past businesses as well, on a combined basis, that's typically a level that we think is pretty standard.
Can we do that exercise as a city? Like, find out what that take rate would be with some assumptions with commercial?
We could, I mean, it would be a lot of assumptions, but I think we could.
Well, this is a pretty big assumption of 46%, and we don't even know what the commercial is.
No, what I mean is there would be a lot of variables in figuring out what the commercial take rate would be versus residential.
Yeah.
Which we
Would.
can do.
I agree. That's why I'm worried about it. So at what point could we refinance? And how does that work?
Yeah, I tried to describe that, and I think I made it more complex than it needed to be, sorry. Most of these bonds, all of these bonds, would typically have a 10-year call protection provision for the bond investor. So traditionally, you know, if you issued these in '23, probably you wouldn't be able to refinance them before 2032.
Okay.
And at that point, you could refund them at any time, in whole or in part or whatnot. Where I made it more probably convoluted was we used to have advance refundings where we could actually refund them before that call date and take advantage of interest rates. The IRS has eliminated that ability in the current IRS statute, so.
So we have to hold it for 10 years, and then at that point, we can reevaluate and determine
Yeah,
if there's
yeah.
a interest rate advantage or...
Yep. And traditionally, as I mentioned before, 95% plus is not held to maturity. The debt doesn't get issued and held to maturity. It gets refinanced. You think of the one chart, if you go to that next chart, I think the graph, if you can just go to that last page, the graph. So on the bottom here, these are dates, obviously, and the 10-year and the 30-year are depicted by colors. But if you think about it in time frame, if you were at period one, if I had a 1-year bond on the yield curve, it would be the lowest rate versus a 30-year bond would have a higher yield rate. That's a traditional curve to debt structure. We're in a little different period right now because of how the Fed's higher at the lower end of the yield curve, and then it comes down, kind of bellies, and then goes back up. But if you think of yields, they're traditionally more interest rate the longer you go out. That makes sense? So your 1 year is going to be low, your 30 year is going to be higher. So the reason why the bonds are refinanced is twofold. One, interest rates might be better all over. But two, more importantly, you're at a different point in the yield curve.
That's right.
So when you refund, say in 10 years, you're not refunding a 30-year bond or a 25-year bond. You're in a 15-year yield curve. And so your interest rate has commensurately gone down. And so, they're almost always refunded for savings. So that's why I was cautioning the 99 million, the 113 million, those are if they're held to maturity, but that is not usually the case that they're held to maturity.
So do you only have the option to refinance it at 10-year increments, or anytime after 10 years you could reevaluate?
After 10 years, it's on any date.
And then, say we only hit 35% take rate in 5 years. What's the significance of that, and what's the implications to the city in that scenario?
I think in those cases, maybe we could run some sensitivity analysis. I think there are assumptions, but it would be one of, what does the 35% produce in revenue? And it would be back to that shortfall analysis, right? If it's only 35%, but you need a minimum of 40, then it would be whatever that delta is, would be the differentiation.
If I could ask a question of Councilmember Bell.
Yeah,
Okay with you?
sure.
What information, knowing that whatever information we get now is going to be based on innumerable variables and broad assumptions, what data could they bring to us that would make you comfortable with this process?
Thank you. I think it's having realistic take rate numbers. I think 46 sounds really high. To me, it's just my gut reaction. Bountiful has other internet providers, and to my knowledge, we don't know to what percentage of the city they already exist in. Because they are, you know, however many subscribers they have takes away from our number of subscribers. And if they put the full court press on, say they do a really good job marketing better than we do, and they get a 2-year commitment, and that delays us 2 years to get our take rates, then what's the implications of that? To me, I don't know that we've done that exercise to know, okay, if that happens, then we're gonna have to dig into our general fund by X number of millions of dollars for X number of years to break even. And what's that, I just, to me, we're hoping, and we have, I believe we have good faith that this is gonna happen, but we're spending $45 million and obligating ourselves for 25 or 30 years on this. And if that, for some reason, didn't happen, say it's an economic whatever next year, and there's some, maybe it's a world condition that we don't have any control over, but we've now willingly gone into an agreement to pay this money over this period of time, and what's the impacts to our residents? What's that risk? And
in the scenario, do you imagine that residents won't have broadband anymore?
No, but they may choose not to go with our option.
What does Magellan's study say about that?
They said that 60% of the residents would likely go with Bountiful Power or Bountiful Fiber if everything else is equal. And what if it's not equal? What if we have to raise our rate higher than what our subscription, monthly subscription, just to make even our bond?
So I think that for me, what comforts me is the fact that we're going to have a lot better product than is currently available for less money than most people are currently paying. And most people have already indicated that they'd be really comfortable going with Bountiful City as a provider. And I just don't see a scenario where fewer folks are subscribing to broadband service in town.
I just want to jump in, and
Please.
I really appreciate the discussion. It's really crucial that we all get to the bottom of this and get our questions answered. For tonight's purposes, since Jason is here to discuss financing, I would propose that we have other questions that are about fiber in general, that we ask staff to kind of have a list of what our concerns are, what our questions are, and that we direct anything that has to do with financing, anything that because we have the luck of having Mr. Birmingham here to answer our questions, anything that's focused on that. But if there are things that are outside that realm, then let's write those things down and ask staff to do further research so that we can have further discussions about those specific things. So I'm just wondering if anyone else has other questions for Jason that are specific to financing.
I've got a question. First of all, thank you for this presentation. It's been really helpful, very beneficial, because it's filled in a lot of gaps for me from this staff report. I really appreciate on page 5 of your report that you do point out that that it could reduce our borrowing capacity and that it could impact our future bond rating. I think that is a significant risk, and I appreciate that you included risks as well as benefits. And I would just, before I ask my question, I would just refer to a city policy, which, and I quote, says, "The burden of financing city government should, with reasonable deviations, be financed under the principle of benefits received, basic services rendered to the general public, such as police, fire protection, street and parks, should be financed from revenues imposed on the broad general public through property taxes and sales taxes. Special services rendered to special groups of citizens, whether individual or business groups, should be financed by special fees or assessments." I just reference that because you had also pinpointed that as a real risk to the city, and we currently have $158 million of current planned capital expenditures looking into the future that rely heavily on these sales taxes and all of our taxing revenue resources. So a question I have kind of specific to something that you've said tonight is that you've done 6 bonds, or you've helped 6 different cities who have done city-owned, and I just want to make sure that I understand this.
3 of the 6.
Okay, 3 of the 6
There
were
are 6 that have been done, yeah.
city-owned. Okay, so I guess I misunderstood that. I thought that it was 6 fiber projects that resulted in a city-owned project. So of those 6, the 3 of them are
We did,
city-owned.
yeah.
In a similar, are they structured, so we've heard a little bit about Bozeman, how that was structured differently with the 501c3.
Yep.
Could you share with us who the other, was it West Point and Clearfield? Do they own their own?
No, it's a UIA-owned
Okay.
system in both of those cases.
So who are the other city-owned?
The other 2 are outside of the state, so one is Texas. It's in Frisco. That's just a suburb of Dallas, Fort Worth. So Frisco is done that way, and they have a specific sales tax that's charged. We don't enjoy that, but they have a specific sales tax for economic development purposes. What they've pledged is that particular sales tax revenue that is used for that. So they plan the same way. Their system revenues is what's intended to pay for it, but what they've issued bonds based upon is that security interest.
Okay, so they have that, so they're also kind of a little bit of a different animal with that economic development.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's too different because in their state, they're a little different because Texas, they have local option sales tax as well as that economic development tax. We have a 1% local option sales tax. What is akin to probably their economic development tax, which they don't have, is a municipal energy sales and use tax that we would put on like power, natural gas, telecommunications. You also have a franchise tax. They don't have that. So a replacement source in their, I would say, is that economic development tax that they use the way that our traditional cities use municipal energy taxes.
When did they go out to bond?
I think it was 2016, I believe.
And who is the third city?
Yeah, the last one is in California, and they've issued multiple tranches. So they started issuing, and they're a consortium of cities near the Tahoe area. And so they're an agency that's spread out bigger than just a city. So there's an interlocal cooperative agency where those cities, although the size of them are about the size of this city, maybe 40,000 people, but it's 2 or 3 cities through an interlocal agency. The same thing, local option sales tax is how they backstop that. They did it in phases. So they build out a certain phase to get by a certain number of people, saw how that take rate went, and then went back to the market, and they haven't issued all of their proposed tranches yet to get past all of it. I will say that in hindsight, they've told us a few times that they wish they would have done it at the time that they did it all, because the construction cost then was a lot better than it is in the phased approach that they did. But that's how they, maybe took some of the, maybe in their minds, took some of the risk out of the take rate optionality. So they deployed in strategic places, see what the take rate was, and then go to the next part. There is another structure. It's been used in Utah, in Brigham City. It's a unique one. It's a special assessment. So what happened there is, if you're a resident or a business that wanted it, you would voluntarily go to the city, sign up, and they would assess your property over a period of time in order to deploy the fiber. So that was originally subscribed in, I think it was 2018, about a $12 million bond issue that was done for that, but all of it was pre-subscribed. Property owners, residents, businesses went and signed up for it, and they said, yeah, assess my property, that's how I'll pay for it.
You know what the take rates have been in Brigham City then?
I don't. I could probably get a list of all the take rates within any of, really, other than UIA, Utopia, these cities, with the exception of, outside of the state. Before now, Utopia has never been willing to grant ownership. Their mode has always been, we retain ownership, we retain all of the assets, you backstop it with an agreement to pledge your sales tax or franchise tax. When we got them to do Bozeman, because UIA, interesting enough, is the operator in Bozeman, Montana. But they don't own the system, the 501c3 does there. So this was the first time we could get them to use the model that we're saying. I was preaching this for a long time to them of, there are a lot of cities in Utah that if they're gonna put their skin in the game, it doesn't make any sense for them to not own the asset. That's an important, and they've had a hard time getting to that point. This is one of the first that they've even that opportunity has even come forward to a Utah municipality. It's happened outside, but not inside.
With UIA.
With UIA.
And just to be clear, Brigham City did no bonding then? For their
They did. They were initial issuer of Utopia debt. So some of their fiber was deployed through the Utopia umbrella. UIA, though, they didn't go through. What they decided to do is do it on their own. They contract with UIA, because UIA still, or Utopia, I should say, still owns the infrastructure. But they financed it with a special assessment bond, not with sales tax bonds and so forth.
Okay.
Providence City would be another example of a non-UIA city that is, not Magellan, who was Strata, Strata operated and owned infrastructure. They've had some difficulty in the marketing. I will say that they've had some difficulty in marketing, but they've basically never had to, rely upon sales tax or franchise tax, even though that was the pledge. But that's an example of a non-UIA using the same model through a Strata or a Magellan, or, someone that would be a competitor, I guess, to UIA. So the same structure, I guess, has been used where we don't have system revenue pledges, they just aren't cost effective, so they've used sales tax and franchise tax to support it.
Thank you. What other questions do you have, Council?
So to answer maybe a question that what I would need, I would love to see the take rates at completion of these. So the list that we have was kind of a snapshot in time. It didn't show when the system was completed. And then I think it would be nice to have at 5-year increments of what that take rate was. with dates so that we can see where it is in time. I think trying to bring subscribers on today is different than 10 years ago because there is more competition in the market. Excuse me. But if I can just maybe say some commentary, I appreciate all of your presentation. I had a list of maybe 10 questions and you answered all of those, so thank you. And I appreciate the years of time, years that the staff has spent on this and the council, the current council and the previous council that have got this, and I'm in favor of fiber. I love the idea of reliable and cost-effective and city-owned. I think there's a lot of great benefits to city-owned, but it doesn't come without risk, and that's where I'm cautious today, is clearly identifying that risk, and then if that is a risk, and if it's a reasonable risk, how do we mitigate that risk so that we have a safety plan in place? And you called it a different, so I think it'd be great to have some modeling done at different take rates and determine what our shortfall is and what that cost might be on the tax revenue or our general fund balance, or how do we end up paying for that for however many years till we think we can get that take rate to be where it needs to be. I just haven't seen that work done, and that's where I'm uncomfortable. It's not that I'm no today, it's just that I feel like I just don't have that comfort level to spend that kind of money.
Can I comment, council member?
Sure.
This is not intended to sound anything like a correction or a lecture at all, just what has made me more comfortable. And that is that if we leverage a city asset like that revenue stream, even though we're going to pay from the revenue of the service itself, we make the system more able to pay its own way. If we go with the option that limits the bond to repayment by those who are subscribers, we cripple the bond, or we cripple the revenue stream and make it more difficult and require a higher take rate for it to pencil. So I'm not trying to be Pollyanna here and say that all in life is popsicles and whatever, but it's a comforting aspect of this information that Jason has presented to us tonight, that the system more easily pays its own way if we can use a city resource or a city asset to leverage that lower interest rate.
So let me just clarify that then.
Yeah.
If I was confusing in my comments, I agree. If we move forward, and assuming we do, it is also my opinion that we need to do it the most cost-effective way with the smallest interest rate. Having said that, the part that if we did a revenue bond, the part that makes me feel good is that we have many eyes looking at that in underwriting to make sure that our finances look good and make sense. Moving away from that, we no longer have those eyes looking at it, and we don't have the modeling done to the level that I would like to have done. If we go to the tax revenue, that's all, we don't even go through that exercise, and I think that exercise has value.
Great comment.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Thank you. I respect where you're coming from, and I think we're clear on what you'd like to see. Any other questions for Jason or any other general thoughts before we end this topic?
Thanks.
I have a question, just kind of piggybacking on what Jesse has said, and also with the multiple referencing to various take rates in various cities, and our lowest proposed lowest required take rate on this information is 47%, with the highest at 67%. And again, I agree with Jesse, those are high take rates, and I think something that would be helpful, and maybe you have some guidance for this, Jason, would be if you know in these cities what percentage of the take rate is from commercial or businesses, because I know that we did a survey. We didn't have that was informative, but I'm not sure that the information, Gary, was disaggregated out, like this is what commercial and businesses are saying their appetite for fiber is. Do you have any
Yeah.
insight as far as commercial business take rates in these cities?
Yeah, I think we can get all of that data. I would agree with Jesse that I think that is probably a good, as a FA or financial advisor, I'd recommend due diligence. That would be some of the due diligence. And I think we can generate that information both on the commercial side, the residential side. The take rate was kind of a quick put together in here. What I'm also concerned about is we're not comparing apples to apples. We have residential, but when we talk about take rates, we're really talking about going by everybody, the commercial, industrial, institutional. Some of the biggest users are institutional users on some of these systems. I don't know, Davis County School District, this might be the ideal platform for them to use, and they might be worth, I don't know, a couple thousand residents. Right? So I want to make sure you compare apples to apples. So, I'd work with Gary and Galen. I'd be happy to go back and list all the cities that I know, and I can get the data. I can tell you what is commercial, what is residential, what the take rates were expected to be, what they delivered at, when they got subscribed versus how long did it take. I can give you a better perspective of what that looks like.
So a question I've also had kind of that I'm not sure I've had the information on is I know that we have a fiber network here on our city campus and a number of city properties. We have fiber going to our different assets throughout the city. How would municipal utilization of the fiber network be computed into the take rates, if at all? Because that.
Your use for public buildings, your own.
Because we're a pretty big institution.
Yeah, I would assume that those, if you have your own system, this wouldn't duplicate it, right? The system you're talking about would just be for deployment of others that don't necessarily have your option. You've deployed your own option?
Yeah, right now, for example, we contract with Utopia. And so we would be a payer into our own system. We would no longer pay Utopia, we'd pay ourselves.
So we would be paying, sorry, just want to make sure that would be paying the same rate as other utilizers, because that was something that I had the understanding that is if we owned the system, we would not be paying into the system as users.
No, we would still be users of the system, and I'm looking at Tyson and Galen, but, we would have to show for our enterprise funds for sure the true cost of operation. So we also would have to pay into that system like anybody else. Where the savings come is we would be able to put in infrastructure fiber that would replace other technologies. For example, we'd be able to take fiber to our parks rather than putting a wireless system for our sprinkler systems and things like that. But we would still be paying, like any other user would for the system.
So
And part of the
municipal
efficiency.
use would be counted toward
It'd be a
our
part of
take rate.
It'd be part of the commercial use. And none of that, and as pointed out, none of that is calculated in that 47%. So, as we get some estimates on what we think a reasonable commercial, institutional, municipal or governmental would be, that take rate will come down from 47%. And as Jason points out, because those revenues are so much higher from those users than residential, it could come down a lot. I just wanted to demonstrate sort of a worst-case scenario. That 47 to 67% assumes no commercial users, which isn't accurate.
So some of our largest commercial users would be schools, the school district, the hospital, maybe, industrial users, like I'm thinking Air Products. Have we reached out to any of these organizations to see, do they already have their own fiber networks? What would their?
No, that would all come as part of the marketing plan. We're just too early.
So before we need to make a decision on the bond, we could, on what kind of bond we may approve here as council, we could get that.
Well, again, I don't know that we could get commitments from people. We could do some surveying if the council wanted to do that. But another point I'd just like to maybe mention here is that time is a little bit of the essence. Roger Timmerman happened to come and say goodbye to Alan West today at his farewell party, so I talked to Roger for a little while. As Jason pointed out, the sooner we can build the system, the faster we can generate revenues. They have a contractor right now who is available. They aren't building any other systems. So I just want to keep that in mind with the council, that if, we want to do our due diligence, but we don't want to delay any longer than we have to in gathering information, because there will be a real cost to that if we end up having Utopia's contractor building somebody else's system. It'll delay how quickly we can put our own in.
Can you, Gary, when do we expect to have that contract complete with UIA again?
So we received it last week, I think. Clint's reviewed it. I haven't reviewed it yet. My review begins this week. I would say within a month, we would have a contract with Utopia that the council could look at.
Having that contract in-house, like we now have access to it and can look at it, can that help us determine what the customer, subscription rates will be at different increments? So I think that would also be helpful to know now that we've made assumptions of what the cost might be to the subscriber. Now that we're in the contract phase, it would be nice to know and update what that subscription fee might look like to cover the bond, cover UIA, cover the ISP, and the $7 refresh rate and all those things. To see that together, I think would be really helpful to compare that to what the market might show us too.
Yep, that is all coming now that we're at that phase.
Councilwoman Bradshaw.
Thanks. Been waiting. Jason, I thought your presentation was excellent. I came in with thinking I had a favorite option and a backup option. I think you've given us a lot to chew on, and it has changed some of the options in my mind. And I think what I would suggest is we all take this and go chew on it some more, so that we can get any good questions to staff. I'd maybe suggest that what we need isn't so much more data from Jason, but what we want is perhaps to hear from our staff or from Utopia about their marketing plan. That's what I heard resonating, is how do we achieve that take rate? And I think that the benefit of the model we are proposing is we get to not just have our credit card used without having an asset to show for it at the end of the day, but we get the benefit of an entity who's done this in multiple cities and has encountered dealing with the incumbent carriers wanting to undercut and undermine a take rate, and has worked with cities all along the Wasatch Front on how to market. And they have done the analysis of cities that aren't too different from ours, that don't have huge commercial centers, on how to find that balance between commercial and residential. So I would submit that as one of the things I'd love to have staff bring back, either directly from Utopia or for you to present on their behalf, so that we can get to a resolve on this issue. Our residents have waited quite a while. I think we might have been accused of dithering. Was that the right word, Councilman Higginson?
That was the word.
And so I don't, it's overlapped at this point, two different councils. And so while we need to make the most important decisions with the taxpayers' dollars and assets and the future of our city, I wouldn't want us to be accused of dithering unduly.
Okay, thank you so much.
Add something. I agree. I agree that there has been the idea of dithering. However, up until this report And again, excellent, and as you say, a lot to chew on. All of the assumptions that we have gone forward with and the decision to choose a city-owned network is based on revenue-backed, a revenue-backed bond. And I would just point to, even in the minutes from our January 10th meeting, Councilmember Bradshaw asked a clarifying question about whether the bond would be subscriber-based, and that no city revenues would be used to back the bond, to which the answer was affirmatively. The bonds would be structured to be backed by subscriber-backed revenues.
So
And
with
so
all,
it is
with all
a-
respect, I
It
think.
is a paradigm, indeed, a paradigm shift here under which the agreement to move forward with a city-backed plan is
So with due respect,
operating on new ground.
you know, I think I'd refer you to the minutes from the next meeting, because there was a really critical discussion we had in the opening of the very next city council meeting. Because I had asked, when I went back and reviewed the video on YouTube of what I had asked and how Gary had answered, I asked probably what was an unfairly compound question, and Gary sought to answer it and answered part of my compound question. And he wanted to make sure, and so did so in our very next meeting, to make sure that it was understood that he had not answered that full compound question, and took the time to do so in a public meeting to make sure that that was properly reflected before us. And what I appreciated is, after he reviewed that, he actually called me to talk through what I had asked and what the answer was, and what I had intended in my answer, to make sure that he could clarify that on the record. So to my mind, I think what we need to do, to be fair to Gary, is that he made sure to let us know in that very next meeting that while there were subscriber-only based bond options, that there were actively other options that would include backing of other types of tax revenues. And he made it a real point to pause and stop and make sure that we knew that.
Thank you. Any other last questions for Jason?
Thank you.
We really appreciate your time. Great information, really informative. Thank you so much.
Appreciate your questions, and if there is any additional information, data, I'll work closely with your staff to gather some of that. You know, those are interesting things to know, I think. So, you know, if we can get some of that information and that helps some of your due diligence, I'm certainly happy to help out in that way.
That sensitivity analysis you mentioned.
Yeah, that would be,
Awesome.
I think, something that could be put together fairly easy, just based on the subscription rates and where you think the take rates are. And the gap is pretty easy to, I mean, not easy, but it'll be able to describe it even graphically. I think that, you know, I don't think the gap is a large gap, but to your point, is there a risk that there's a gap? So far, most communities have not had that risk, other than what I pointed out with the capitalized interest and not having the timing down. Otherwise, the take rates have met all of these models with good accuracy, and have actually been self-sustaining and haven't had to draw on any of the other assets. Utopia is a different thing, just so we're all clear. Utopia stranded a couple $100 million of debt when they started at this. So Utopia and UIA, they're not apples to apples. It's a different model, but nothing that's been financed through UIA has needed to use any of those sales tax or franchise tax, other than a couple examples of just short term. So
Thank you.
happy to help if I can.
Really, really good information. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. And we will be discussing this further and make sure that our questions are answered. We will now consider approval of Resolution 2023-04, establishing a contract with Davis County Clerk.
Move to adopt the resolution.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and now I will,
Mayor, I'd like to make the motion that we adjourn to a closed session to discuss the acquisition or sale of real property pending litigation and/or to discuss the character and/or the competency of an individual as outlined in state code.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Gotta be roll call, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Look at that.
Yeah, don't take this away from me.
Sorry, sorry.
Up to 200-something million,
Yeah, yeah. This is exciting.
if only.
All right. Councilmember Bell.
Aye.
Councilmember Price Hewish.
Aye.
Councilmember Bradshaw.
Aye.
Councilmember Higginson.
Nay.
Councilmember Segura Bar.
Aye.
You just to spice things up a little bit.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn.
Oh, it was motioned and voted on. Roll call.
Is that, it's on the agenda, but maybe it's not necessary, because we
do
already
that
made
after
the agenda.
Oh, we closed the open meeting.
Okay,
After
we
that.
are adjourned to the closed session. Thank you.